Expert analysts combine their industry knowledge with timely research in order to advise our clients on the best course of action for their business. Today, we'll look at digital supply chain. Other departments, such as sales and marketing, have invested in a digital strategy, and it's become a requirement to compete. However, the digital revolution has not achieved the same level of adoption in supply chain. Many firms struggle with understanding what does a digital supply chain look like? What outcomes should they expect? What pitfalls should they watch for? Today, Laura Cesari, founder of Supply Chain Insights, will walk you through the findings of some of our recent research and give you the answers to these questions. Before I pass this over to Laura, there are some housekeeping items I'd like to cover with you. First, we encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll respond to them at the end of the webinar. You can submit your questions to the Q&A or chat function to the right of your screen. Second, we're recording today's session, and we'll send you a link to the recording and the slides within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. We encourage you to share the recording and the slides with your colleagues, and if you'd like to set up a call with Laura about this research, please reach out to me or Regina to set up that conversation. You will also be able to find this recording along with others on our SlideShare account at www.slideshare.net/Laura Cesari. Third, we welcome you to engage with us on social media. The Twitter hashtag for today is #SCIWebinar. But you can also follow us on Twitter at SC Insights, and of course Laura at L Cesari. We also encourage you to connect with Laura or myself or Regina on LinkedIn and to join our company page at www.linkedin.com/company/supply-chain-insights. With that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the founder of Supply Chain Insights, Laura Cesari. Laura is redefining the industry analyst model to make it friendlier and more useful for supply chain leaders. Laura has written books, Supply Chain Metrics That Matter and Bricks Matter, and is currently working on her third book, Leadership Matters. She also actively blogs on her Supply Chain Insights website and at the Supply Chain Shaman blog, as well as for Forbes. When not writing or running her company, Laura is training for a triathlon, taking classes for her DBA degree in research, quilting for her new granddaughter, and actively taking ballet. So with that introduction, let me hand this over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thanks to the people that have joined us today. I've been studying the evolution of digital supply chain for about 5 years, and today what I want to do is share with you what I have learned and really start the dialogue with you about, how does this apply to your company? So most of you live in a world where your organizations have a marketing department, and they've adopted the term digital marketing about 4 years ago. And I encourage people within these companies to pull up a chair and talk to the folks that are working on digital marketing to think about how new signals can drive new supply chain processes. And I find that most people have not done that. In fact, the digital marketing teams work within a silo often within marketing, and I need to bridge the conversation between the supply chain teams and the digital marketing teams. Now, what we see in marketing is that, like we used to in the days when I was going to high school, we would talk about having a color TV, right? It was a big thing, But today, we just have a TV, right? We don't say color anymore, right? We're in the digital age. We assume that it's color. And what we see in the marketing processes is it's become very similar, right? Digital marketing is marketing. But what we have in the supply chain world is we have processes that respond, they don't sense. And we have processes that have evolved over the last 3 decades that are based upon latent data. So orders and shipments, which are the primary signals for the supply chain, have latency associated with the data, associated with what's happening in the market. The same thing on the procurement side with suppliers. All of that data has latency. So even if the data moves real time, it will carry latency. And the processes are inside out, they're not outside in. So today I want to challenge you to make the leap, to think about how do you drive within your organization this evolution from what people call best practices, but are really archaic practices, right? They're based upon orders and shipments and efficient transactions. They're not based upon sensing, and they're not based upon outside-in processes. And what I see is that we have not an evolution, but a step change in thinking about supply chains, and that we need to pull up the chair in the table to the folks that are thinking about the digital world and think about how we could start redesigning the supply chains outside in with a clean sheet of paper. And it's uncomfortable because we've spent millions of dollars putting in technologies that we've called best practices. And it requires us to learn new terminology like sentiment analysis and rules-based ontologies and cognitive learning. And these aren't tools and technologies that come from vendors that, you know, are the ones that we frequently talk to or at the shows that we go to. And we've got to look at other industries like the financial and the insurance and the hospitality industries to look at how they're making the shift from not just digital marketing to digital operations, and think about how could we apply these learnings to what we do. And today what I want to do is give you some insights based upon the research that we've been doing about how you can make the shift. And the first thing you got to do is you got to gather folks around and you got to get prepared. And you've got to really come to grips with the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to raise your hand and ask questions about terms that, you know, it's hard to say, I don't know what sentiment analysis is, or I don't know what those terms mean, and how does that apply to my world of ERP instances and traditional APS, and how do I use the power of the cloud, and what could I use with Internet of Things? And so the first question is, let's get prepared. Let's be open to the outcome. Let's get in connection with our own souls to be able to be uncomfortable. Because I come to you today saying, I don't think we have best practices. I think we have evolving practices. And I don't think it's an evolution. I think as we look at the digital supply chain, it's not I'm just going to put new technologies on top of existing architectures. Instead, I think the architectures we have today are legacy. They've really been architected to be very efficient at orders and shipment and purchase order data, and to translate that data across the supply chain. And as we do, we amplify and distort the network signals of customers and suppliers. The current architectures are not good at sensing. They don't have ways that we can bring in the digital data, either from telematics and transportation or social and unstructured data into demand sensing and new product launch, or to be able to look at the evolution of new processes like digital path to purchase or digital manufacturing with streaming data, or to be able to look at redefining maintenance and repair and returns to be able to keep big machinery up and more useful. Streaming data requires new architectures, and so what we have today are really architectures that are based upon transactional data. And so as we think about defining new practices, I think we can break through for new forms of value, but it requires us to be uncomfortable, and many of the projects that we may put forward will not have defined return on investment. For example, I coined the term demand signal repository about 8 years ago as an analyst working with a woman by the name of Kara Romanell, who's now at Consumer Goods Technology. And we've been about 8 years on that journey of sensing demand data, translating demand data, and we haven't made a lot of progress. The companies that do this tell me three things. Number one, they didn't know what the return on investment was when they first started. And it was hard for them to get money because most companies who are doing this well are leaders and they're innovating. And so they don't talk to others and they don't share. And the second thing was their internal organizations wanted to have a very well-defined return on investment before they'd fund the project. But when they got into it and they started sensing data outside in, they found that the return on investment was actually weeks, and in some cases it was days. And it happened that it drove more sales, and that it happened that they could sense out of stocks. And so you don't find people talking about it because they feel that that's competitive advantage. The third thing is it required a redefinition of processes cross-functionally, and we don't do that very well. We're very functionally oriented in the supply chain around source, make, deliver. Our processes are really very focused there. Our metrics are focused there. And there are not natural organizations that go across cross-functions and look at outside in, end-to-end, and look at the opportunities for digital. And so as we think about defining new practices, we've got to set up groups to think about this and to redefine what it could be. It isn't the supply chain we have today. Instead, it's what the supply chain could be. And to do this, we've got to learn from the past. The supply chain concepts are now 32 years old, but we have to unlearn and we have to challenge ourselves so that we can relearn and think about the future. So with that, I want to give you some examples. I'm going to start with a definition. So when I think about the digital supply chain, I think about 4 characteristics. First of all, it's real-time data that's current with the market. While a lot of technologies companies will talk about real-time data, they're really talking about connection of data with latency. So an order has demand latency. So when I talk about demand latency, it's the translation of that demand from the customer usage through the customer channel, either distributor or warehouse, to roll up through those reorder points to be able for a manufacturer or distributor to get an order. Let me give you an example. In consumer packaged goods for a fast turn item, the demand latency is 7 to 14 days. So people within that organization think they're working on current data with an order, but actually when they get that order and it's rolled up through replenishment cycles, that order has latency of 7 to 14 days. So even if you move that data within the enterprise in a more near real-time way and improve the connectivity, you're still moving data with latency. On a long-tail item, something that is a new product launch or a promoted item, that latency can be 35 to 75 days. So I was working with a company that made allergen drugs, and that's a long-tail product, and it's also something that spikes, very responsive to market needs, because the allergy seasons will follow the pollen patterns, and that'll follow the climatic change. And so their translation of orders was 65 to 70 days. So therefore, it became essential for them to use channel data and to translate off of channel data, to pull through the retail stores, back through the distributors, and to be able to look at the pattern recognition across that data. Now, that's not as simple as just stuffing point-of-sale data into forecasting or even just stuffing the signal into the traditional demand sensing technologies. Instead, you've got to look outside in about new forms of pattern recognition, new forms of artificial intelligence, new forms of cognitive learning that can help you to connect that data real time with zero latency. Recognition of latency of data and decreasing the bullwhip effect around latency to decrease the amplification of the signal so that we can better respond is a characteristic of the digital supply chain. The second is that they are cloud-based deployments with continual adoption for the evolution of the technologies. So if we think about the traditional supply chain, we implemented licensed software and we went through license upgrades and maintenance programs. And we had, kind of this march towards the evolution of software A and then the migration. And as we think about the digital supply chain processes, we are going to have new business models based upon the cloud with continual adaptation of the software for maintenance upgrades. But we'll also see consulting partners and we'll see technology providers that we call ISVs combined to be able to bring the software to you in new business models. So as we think about that, that could be the combination of content with learning systems with, the ability to have predictive analytics. It could be business process outsourcing with content, lots of opportunities. So one of the things we have to be very open to is, what does the business model of software look like? And in that process, we need to stabilize our legacy investments around ERP and APS so that we can start to adapt some of the concepts around cloud-based deployments. And don't be confused about cloud and hosted. When I'm talking about cloud-based deployments, I'm thinking about software as a service that allows us to get out of the maintenance cycle. The third factor is that today's supply chains are inside out. They work on traditional signals, and it's about the enterprise, and it's about enterprise efficiency. And as we build outside in to be able to connect customers to suppliers, we have to use market data. And the market data comes in all different forms. It comes in unstructured data with social. It comes in ratings and reviews. It comes in weather data. It comes in quality data with blogging and being able to listen. And it needs to be combined with traditional data like customer call center data and also a lot of the work that we do in traditional supply chains. But we have to start mapping those processes outside in from the market back. On the supplier side, it comes through the building of business value networks and canonical infrastructures that allow us to get past the latency of document exchange with EDI and to think about how we can have many-to-many architectures that allow us to connect with suppliers. Our suppliers are probably the most fragile in the 12 years I've been in the supply chain space. And as we think about sensing supplier viability, the use of unstructured data is extremely important, and also being able to keep synchronization of documents. So as we think about outside-in processes, we don't just think about integration. Instead, we think about harmonization and synchronization of data. So the harmonization of data allows us to synchronize against different points around time, different calendars, different units of measure, and also the synchronization of data allows us to harmonize against the context of data around item translation, item hierarchy, customer hierarchies, et cetera. And so synchronization and harmonization of data is extremely important as we think about the building of outside-in processes. The other thing is, as we've grown up in supply chain, we've accepted the fact that supply chains don't sense. In fact, most supply chains will work on a rote response, which is based upon history, which is based upon typically distorted history, and those patterns of history are not as valuable as the patterns of what's happening in the market today. So as we move forward and we work on sensing based upon the market today, we're going to be working on different technology infrastructures that are not in existence today. So for example, the Internet of Things. I had a webinar 6 months ago where Costa Coffee in England was talking about the automation of the coffee service so that they could see in real time at all of their units what was being purchased. And that Internet of Things data is streaming data. And streaming data doesn't fit into columnar-based architectures. It needs a different form of data, and it's a very large form of data. And so as you think about the evolution of streaming data and you think about how you can change the outcome for the supply chain, there are lots of applications. So whether it's cold chain and the fact that we throw away about 1/5 of fresh fruits and vegetables, and that 2 out of 5 chickens are thrown away, or that our oncology drugs are not as effective as we'd like them to be. When you think about cold chain data, we're going to be doing streaming data off of cases and pallets and changing directed put away so that the temperature abuse that an individual item has in a truck or an air shipment will actually drive directed put away so that we can increase the longevity of the life cycle of items. And that combination of streaming data with learning systems to be able to drive individual data and to get past the law of averages is extremely powerful. And we'll also talk about how it defines predictive maintenance. So if you think about that floor of the factory that you have today, you've got programmable logic controllers, you've got lots of sensors, but that data is not connected. And we have production planning systems and we have manufacturing execution systems that don't connect to that data. And we predict maintenance failures and we take equipment down on an average or a mean time failure. But as you think about the evolution of digital manufacturing, particularly in process industries, the Internet of Things with streaming data can amazingly change what we can do on return on assets and return on invested capital by redefining the world of the factory. The other thing is, as we think about cognitive learning, our supply chains were based upon a single if to a single then. If you think about ATP and you think about the rules that we have in the traditional supply chain, we had simple if-then statements, but supply chains don't play by the rules. As soon as we define a rule, then something happens in the real world that changes it. And so cognitive learning in combination with rules-based ontologies allow us to map multiple ifs to multiple thens to be able to look at combination of options and to learn over time. And I think we're 5 years away from learning systems. And these learning systems take predictive analytics to the next stage where we can test and learn in vitro. And we can test and learn overnight based upon our data. I think it changes our world of master data. Today we have lots of people hand coding master data, but master data contains lots of contextual data. And as we hand code that data and hard code that data, we lose the context. And so rules-based ontologies and cognitive learning for customer data and item data and procurement data gets us out of that issue. And I think that we're 5 years away from these technologies totally redefining the world of master data as we know it. So as we get ready and we accept that it's not an evolution and we think about the processes that we could have with real-time data, with no latency, with cloud-based deployments, connecting outside in, and looking at new forms of data, we've got to really think about what is the construct of the cloud and how do we go about managing the cloud at a governance level. And so as we think about supply chain centers of excellence and we think about the current definition of IT, we've got to think about what do those systems look like in the cloud and how do we power the cloud. The other thing is the Internet of Things is streaming data, and how do we manage streaming data in our organization, and what do those organizational infrastructures look like? And the data lakes are about demand insights data, and so supplier insights data, and it's about mining data to answer the questions you don't know, not the questions you know to ask. So for example, a customer that I work with frequently is Kellogg's. Kellogg launched products in the market that had smelly liners. They didn't do it intentionally. They had a quality problem. But they weren't listening to social sentiment about smelly liners because they just assumed that their liners didn't smell. And so if they were listening to the questions that they didn't know to ask, they would have picked up those quality issues earlier. Same thing with the tire issues that we've had with cars or the brake issues that we've had with cars. If companies were listening outside in to the questions that they don't know to ask, they would pick up quality and they would be able to respond more quickly. So as we think about the supply chain going digital and we think about the shifts in data structures, we see the combination of mobility, social and unstructured data, and I would encourage each of you to list all the forms of unstructured data that you're not using today, whether it's documents like contracts or digital images or email or social data or ratings and reviews or blog data or warranty data or quality data. The supply chain is swimming with unstructured data, and our current systems are all about structured data. We want to put all our data into nice, neat rows and columns and drive linear optimization. And we've got to get out of that mindset. Digital images, as we move into 3D printing or we move into printing on demand, 3D printing offers tremendous opportunities that we're going to talk about, and we're right at the cusp of that. The redefinition of e-commerce. So the traditional view of e-commerce was it was really going to be a retail interaction with a customer, but today manufacturers have the ability to do e-commerce and to have customer-centric supply chains, but that requires the evolution of many-to-many data models for multi-tier ATP, for last-mile delivery, and rethinking how we interact with those customers, because as we do this, we have to work with the e-commerce pure plays, and we have to redefine quality and be sure that we can manage counterfeit goods. And that requires us to embrace things like QR codes and different sentiment mining of customers. Then we have canonical integration that's happening in the value networks, in the evolution of business networks, which allow us to connect many to many. So the traditional applications connected one company to one company, and we all know that we're networked and we need many to many architectures in that extended supply chain. So the evolution of business value networks, which allows us to connect many to many through canonical infrastructures, allow us to connect in a way that our downstream partners want to connect with us and move the data upstream. We've talked about cloud computing, we've talked about cognitive learning and the Internet of Things. So I would encourage you to build your own model like this and to map what you think are your digital processes, whether it's digital agriculture, whether it's digital maintenance, whether it's digital path to purchase. And on the outside, think about the processes that power your ability to be disruptive. So here I have test and learn. So you may be working with technologies like applied predictive technologies, where you can test and learn in vitro in the market. That's a digital process. Or telematics, which allow us to test and sense what's happening in transportation so that we can redirect and we can manage transportation flows better. Or listening. One of the things we're going to talk about today is the mining of unstructured data for listening, for customer service, for quality, for ratings and reviews, to be able to use the unstructured data for social data, and the collaborative economy, which allows us to use multiple people. So whether it's Uber redefining the automotive industry or Sidecar redefining the last mile delivery by using cabs in all of the cities of the United States, or whether it's GigaWalk, which is redefining the crowd to use sensing at the shelf, what we have is the ability to redefine through new technology. So let's just back up. Why does it matter? Well, today's supply chain's stuck. You know, we've used these technologies that are traditional, and what's happened is most companies say, wow, there's a room for improvement. We're cautious, we're reactive, we're traditional, we're push, we're inside out, and what we want to do is we want to be more global, we want to sense, we want to work at the speed of business. And as we look at the building of the global multinational, we have increasing demand volatility. So as we have elongated the long tail of the supply chain, adding more and more products, demand volatility has increased. Our traditional techniques around forecasting and replenishment are not adequate. They were built upon deterministic optimization, assuming that I could use history to project demand and that I could consume that history and I could drive replenishment. But what happens in that translation of dependent demand is we amplify and distort the signal. And so as we think about building outside-in processes, what we get into are new technologies for demand sensing. And then supplier viability, as we think about the supplier base, our suppliers are more and more crucial, they're more fragile, and we need to sense. So as things happen around the world, we need to sense the health of our suppliers, and we need to better connect with our suppliers. The other issue is, as we contrast 5 years ago versus the future 5 years, we have increasing operations complexity. So whether it's managing factories around the world or dealing with port issues, the operations complexity, this cadence of data, the ability to respond is where it's never been before. And so our ability to sense is really important to operations complexity. And of course, regulations and compliance as we deal with serial data and labeling, and we deal with compliance in our supply chain. So as we think about risk and business continuity, we have higher risk, and it isn't just about traditional product quality or traditional supply chain visibility. Instead, it's about redefining the processes. Now, the webinar I did 6 months ago where we were talking about the evolution of digital, I had a person on who I love, is named Marty Kislik, who's director at FMC. And Marty was talking about the fact that he's a digital holdout, right? That he didn't grow up in the digital workforce, and that one of the things that he was going to do is he was going to start a group of digital natives because he had heard the Coast to Coffee story on the use of Internet of Things to really brainstorm about what this could be. Marty had come to the table to say, I think we're the problem. I think us gray-haired guys in supply chain are the problem. And so as we think about our workforce, we've got the digital natives who accept technology and they really question traditional supply chain processes, but they're not allowed to. And we've got the digital immigrants who are timid, but they're trying. But a lot of our workforce and the traditional supply chain are still the digital holdouts and the digitally disengaged. The folks that are like, why do I need to? My current supply chain processes work just fine. And I would argue that they don't, and that we're losing ground on building talent. When we look at talent and the building of talent, more and more companies are struggling with how do they build talent with this changing workforce, and how do we drive the processes. Now, what I'd want to do now is talk about some applications of these concepts. I'm going to take you through digital path to purchase, digital manufacturing, and building of value networks. And I'm just going to take you through so that you can get an idea about how to whiteboard some opportunity. So the digital path to purchase is a very industry-specific process that's good for consumer electronics, food and beverage, consumer products, and I would argue even healthcare. And it's the use of automation to really automate the 4 moments of truth in the purchase cycle through the use of social, mobile, digital, and other analytics technologies. And in doing this, what we're doing is we're looking at how do we orchestrate the 4 moments of truth. Now, often the digital marketing folks are looking at the list. They're looking at digital recipes, digital coupons, online rating and review, but that data never gets back to the supply chain. And that's why I say pull up your chair and start talking about how you tie that data to traditional promotions. And then the folks that are working on digital marketing are also thinking about the in-store experience, about how do I do shelf sensing, work with QR codes, in-store couponing, IP address sensing, localized assortment. So we've broad brush markets where we have the same items in all of our grocery stores in consumer packaged goods. So what we're doing is building rules-based ontologies based upon customer preferences to be able to look at how can I change assortment based upon demographics. Think about what that does to the supply chain. And then we've got the checkout, the downstream data, point of sale data and the loyalty data, which we can harvest to be able to decrease demand latency, and then usage with sentiment data to be able to listen to the customer and rating and review data. So today we have done some work on digital path to purchase, and we found that in consumer packaged goods companies, that 63% of companies have a digital path to purchase initiative, but most of these are isolated into marketing. And they've been working on it for about 1.6 years. But most supply chain professionals don't cross over the function to really question how could they use this data. And so when we look at demand shaping, we find that the greatest increase is in digital path to purchase, and we have greater volatility of promotions because of what's happening in the digital path to purchase. And so as we think about it, I'm going to give you some examples, right? This is an Anheuser-Busch example where they actually used an application on their phone for snapping on the shelf, and they had enlisted the power of the crowd to say, if you go to the shelf and you're a Bud watcher, that you'll snap this shelf and you'll tell us that it's out of stock. Now imagine how valuable that is for the supply chain professional to know when you're out of stock. And they have a free app on their phone, and when that happens, they get an email that allows them to know that they're appreciated. So thank you for letting Bud Hunters know about your beer being out of stock. It looks like that the store is out of stock of this product. Why not grab some, and then they're upselling to a higher level product and take it for a $2 off coupon. Now, as a supply chain professional, you're going to want to know that you're out of stock, what you're being upgraded on, and this is important data for you to know. The other thing is they're sending a text message to the retailer to say, you are out of stock, and we want you to contact your wholesaler or your customer. So this is an example of automation of digital path to purchase. Most consumer packaged goods companies have these kind of programs that are happening, and they're not using them into the supply chain. The other thing is we have the rise of Alibaba and Amazon and Zappos and the e-commerce pure plays, and the ability for manufacturers to be able to sell online with e-commerce. And you might say, yeah, Laura, I get it, so why is that so important? Well, e-commerce sales carry zero latency. You can see e-commerce true sales to the customer with almost no latency. So as you think about test and learn strategies and how you can read customer sentiment, connecting with your e-commerce channel as an indicator into forecasting or being able to orchestrate test and learn strategies is extremely important. So as you think about the graph, which allows you to connect your customers, your employees, and your partners outside in, you've really got to think about your digital processes and how you can translate your digital marketing programs into the supply chain. So for example, Levi's uses emoticons for new product launch, and that's an indicator of which jeans are going to be the most successful for sale. And we also have examples, and this is only about 2% of companies, that are actively mining their social data to look at sentiment. So this is an example from Newell Rubbermaid that I've used in my book, where Newell Rubbermaid was reading both their ratings and reviews in a cross-functional team and looking at product quality. And they had introduced a new product to the market called the Product Saver. And the Product Saver was a product they were really, really excited about. But when it got to the market, they started getting bad reviews. Now, as a supply chain professional, what you would see is that you were probably out of stock, you had stuffed the channel, you had what you thought was going to be a successful product launch, but the product was not being received very well by the customers. Now, they can see the rating and review data almost daily, and they can see the unstructured data very quickly. And because they had cross-functional teams, they could look at the data and they could say, wow, we haven't taught our customers how to use the product. So this product was designed to take unwashed lettuce or unwashed fruits and vegetables and to put it in containers. And because the customer was washing the containers, it was molding and our containers were not being effective. And so by doing this, by listening, and this is sentiment analysis where you can take unstructured data, mine the data for patterns by demographic region, they were able to reverse the trend and save the new product launch. Less than 3% of companies today are using sentiment analysis, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity for all customer-facing organizations to be able to better understand the needs of customers. Let's talk about digital manufacturing. So I talked about maintenance is really built upon the predictive maintenance technologies and concepts of 30 years. That we don't use the outputs from sensor pumps and motors, which is the Internet of Things, to sense the condition of equipment and align maintenance programs before meantime failure. And so when we looked at process manufacturing in our recent surveys, we find very few companies are actually embracing mobility to be able to connect with the Internet of Things, and that, most companies are still looking at this like traditional processes. And in parallel, we find that 3D printing or additive manufacturing is being used for about 6% of production in the digital processes, and 35% plan to use 3D printing to manufacture processes in the next 3 years. So it's happening very slowly. And as we think about how we could change manufacturing, either through Internet of Things or through 3D printing, a lot of opportunities will be able to happen. Hershey is doing additive printing of chocolate for special chocolates. Could we have additive printing to be able to redefine MRO, or maintenance and repair? We're starting to get the evolution of these technologies that are now commercial. And so at my conference 2 years ago, we had a talk about 3D printing of human organs. Could we 3D print a tumor in the case of cancer and test a drug in a laboratory to see how it would be effective on a human and have genetic prescriptive drugs through that? This is a baby heart that was being held up. Could we take stem cells and print organs so that people would no longer have to be on lists? And we also had a presentation from Logitech talking about the ultimate ear, which was a 3D printed item because it's a very specialized hearing device that has to be custom fit for the ear canal. So as we think about, the products that are in the long tail of the supply chain that may be designed for special use cases, it's an opportunity for us to start to shift our thinking. 3D printing, mobility, Internet of Things, how does that change manufacturing? Now let's think about B2B networks, because today what we've really automated is the enterprise. We've not automated the business-to-business network. And we're very networked. We're outsourcing most of our manufacturing and our logistics, and these are through parties that aren't just single parties. It's just not one-to-one. It's a stream of data. And when we look at our research and we look at the activities done with suppliers, I want you to look at the low level of importance that people are placing on the transmission of product information digitally, or develop and share digital images of products to be manufactured, or develop and share digital images from parts, or develop digital images for packaging development. These are very low numbers. And I think we need to really embrace that digital transmission to suppliers is such an opportunity, because one of the issues is our value networks are being held together through email and Excel spreadsheets. And I was talking to a supplier of Caterpillar the other day that said, how do I wade through all of these spreadsheets to know what the right part specs are for what's being machined and converted on their production lines? He got like 1,200 spreadsheets a week with all the changes. And so as we look at business-to-business networks that can adapt real time, we really need to think about moving digitally into our supplier base to transmit digital images and to be able to do that at near real time. I feel we aren't thinking about this holistically enough. And when we think about supply chain visibility and we look at where we are on these value networks, the only thing that's performing well today is manufacturing within that company. We lack the ability to see first-tier material suppliers and transportation and logistics networks and enterprise order management to customers. And as we think about digital signals and we think about the evolution of new value networks, whether it's a Limerick on process or E2Open on high-tech and electronics or GT Nexus on transportation, Those are examples of value networks that have canonical infrastructure that are many-to-many that allow the use of digital signals, whether it's telematics and transportation or digital images for suppliers, to be able to have systems of record and to be able to move the data in real time. Most of our funding has been very focused on the enterprise, on ERP, and I encourage people to stabilize the legacy app so that we can build outside-in processes. So I'm just going to wrap up now. You know, supply chain processes are 32 years old. We started really focusing on the efficient supply chain, reducing cost and improving procure-to-pay and order-to-cash. It was all about efficient transactions. And that did not give us the effective supply chain to be able to balance customer service, to have a reliability with the right product, right place, right time, right cost. And that gave the rise to optimization technologies and what we call advanced planning today. But in advanced planning, we typically have deterministic optimization, and there's an assumption we know what the objective function is. And the supply chain is a complex system that really requires us to rethink how are we going to drive resiliency with volatility. And so as we think about demand volatility and supply volatility in the building of outside-in processes, we started working on adaptation with demand-driven, with sensing demand and translating and shaping demand and supply. And now what I want to encourage you to do in the evolution of the digital supply chain is build horizontally, end-to-end, from customer to supplier and bidirectionally. Think about how you take the latency out of data for continuous testing and learning and orchestrate cross-functionally. So I'm going to wrap up here, Allison. I think it's time to invest in the future. We got to start small and design with the end in mind, and we can't just get caught up in traditional processes. Thoughts?
Right. Thanks. So as I mentioned over chat, if anyone has any additional questions, please send them through now. So Laura, we had one question right now, and it was when you were talking about a sentiment analysis, it said, any tips on installing a program?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat, Allison?
Basically, the person wanted to know if you have any insight or advice on initiating a sentiment analysis program.
So first thing is look at the unstructured data and how does that tie to your processes. I think the easiest place to start is either in quality data, because most people would like to know what their customers think, or rating and review data for new product launch, or maintenance and repair data and warranty streams. And so start with building a guiding coalition around what matters. And then look at the insurance and the financial services and the hospitality services of what they've done with sentiment analysis, where they actually mine the data and use it. You're not going to find many manufacturers, distributors, hardcore supply chain leaders that are really using this data. Instead, you're going to have to look to other industries. And then you're going to need to connect with vendors that you may not know, like SAS, who has unstructured text mining and sentiment analysis, Clarabridge, and get familiar with the technologies and build that guiding coalition about why the voice of the customer works. So I'll give you a story. So Whirlpool actually does this, and it came out of an issue that they had on Twitter about the Maytag repairman. So there's an image of the Maytag repairman that the equipment is so hardened and so good that the Maytag repairman never has to come to your house. But in the early days of Twitter, there was a woman by the name of Ducey who called in to have her dishwasher repaired, and they didn't come, and there was an issue in customer service. And so it became a big issue, and it went viral on Fortune, and so that caused that company to have to react and build sentiment analysis and cross-functional processes. You don't want that to happen to you. So you can also use the fear factor of, shouldn't you be listening to what's out there in case something happens? So that's the other thing. Build a guiding coalition and help companies to get out of the fear factor. Does that help, Allison?
Yep. The next question we have is, do you have any recommendations in terms of vendors we should be reviewing?
Well, it depends upon, which piece of the digital supply chain you're going after. So at our conference, we're going to be showcasing a lot of the digital technologies and digital processes. But if it's digital path to purchase, cognitive learning, you can look at a couple of vendors like Entera, Applied Predictive Technologies, some of the work that SAS is doing. If you're looking at predictive maintenance, we have Software AG working on some Internet of Things work there. If we're thinking about building business-to-business value networks and the work there, the business value network vendors that I talked about are good places to start. Where you don't start are on the traditional ERP vendors. They may talk the talk, but most of their legacy is with transactions and efficient transactions. And so I think that we'll start to see movement on the smaller vendors, and then they'll catch up.
Okay. It looks like we don't have any other questions in queue, Laura. So I think what I'd like to do now is to shift gears. You've mentioned a couple times about the conference, and I think that this is a good time for us to talk about, what's going to be in the conference. This is a big event for us. And I think that a lot of the folks on the call really could benefit since we are looking at the future of supply chain. And if you're coming to digital webinars, you're obviously interested in the future of supply chain. So if you want to, dig into that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, so the conference is on September 9th and 10th, and it is our time to get supply chain leaders together to imagine the supply chain of the future. And we have three themes. One is to really look at supply chains to admire, which is our work annually where we look at which supply chains are making the most progress, where, and what can we learn. The second is how do we embrace the digital supply chain and make the pivot. So we'll have in a TED Talk kind of style, 20-minute presentations from new business models. We have Bree and Eileen speaking about how they've transformed the ability to do returns on items, and I'm speaking to a number of vendors around new business models that I'll be able to talk about in a couple of weeks, robotics, sharing economy. And then the third topic is building human potential, which is about supply chain transformation. And in the afternoon of that second day, we'll launch our new simulation game, which is about outside-in processes, which is a lot like the beer game, but it allows teams to play inside out and outside in and actually see what the value proposition will be when people are able to use channel data and supplier data on the balance sheet. Our keynote address is Dr. Gimwat. I love his work around connectivity and what's happening around trade lanes and what the future of trade is. I think he is a very powerful strategic thinker, and I don't know if many of you have read about his cage model and prediction around trade lanes, around the global economy and the evolution of the global multinational. And then we're also, going to be doing a lot of networking and sharing of information from the book that I just wrote on metrics that matter. It's designed for line of business leaders, so the ideal person to come is a director, head of Supply Chain Center of Excellence, thought leader in strategy, people that are really starting to question the future of supply chain.
Great. And, it does, and I'll throw in that I'm running the golf league, so you've got a good laugh in the conference. Come play golf, it'll be a great time. So with that, what I'd like to do is start to wrap up the webinar. So I want to thank everyone for attending today. There's some research going on right now that some of you may be interested in. We're actually just wrapping up a survey on centers of excellence. And so what we're trying to do is get people that either have centers of excellence or would like to get one to respond to this survey. And what we're going to be doing is running 2 private roundtables, virtual roundtables, to go through the results and help individuals either improve the performance of existing centers or figure out the best way and most successful way to implement them. So if you'd like to be part of that research, please reach out to either Laura or myself, and we'll make sure to get you involved in that survey. Additionally, I'd like to mention that we have another webinar coming up in about a month on April 16th on inventory management. So you can reach out to our WebEx page. We'll be uploading that onto our homepage at Supply Chain Insights within the next 24 hours. So keep an eye out for that. Many of you have asked me if the slides are going to be sent out, so we will be sending out the slides to everyone who attended today, along with the recording link. So I would like to encourage everyone, if you found value in this, to please send this out to your colleagues. And as always, if you have additional questions or would like to speak to Laura more about what's included in the research and how you can apply this to your business, please reach out to any one of us. We'll be happy to help you set up that conversation. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your time today. I'm going to keep the webinar open for another couple of minutes just in case there's any last-minute questions anyone has or would like to set up a conversation with Laura. And if we don't hear from you today, we do encourage you, as I said, to join us on social media, both on Twitter, SlideShare, and LinkedIn. And we look forward to having you all on the next webinar. So thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.